smart, but honey, for some reason you really think you are incredibly important.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Talk of the Stacks. I'm Christy Pearson with Friends of the Hennepin County Library. Now, whether you are here with us in person at Minneapolis Central or you are tuning in online, we are delighted that you could join us for another fascinating author conversation. Now, tonight, best-selling novelist Tracy Chevalier is here and joining us to celebrate the launch of her latest masterpiece, The Glassmaker. But first, on behalf of the library and friends, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that in Hennepin County, we live and work on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. Today, the continual effects of colonization and oppression are felt locally by Indigenous communities. By offering this acknowledgement, we commit to recognizing Indigenous nations and to collaborating on the ongoing work of reconciliation. Thank you. Well, I would next like to recognize our generous sponsors who help make this free series possible. Many thanks to the Star Tribune, Ice House, and LSE Architects. So now let's give them a hand. Now, with the return of summer comes one of my favorite library initiatives, summer learning. Now, all season long at our 41 libraries, there are more than 500 free programs for youth, from llama visits, I did say llama visits, and bucket drumming to origami making and rocket launching. Nearly 10,000 young people will engage in these activities again this year. Now, today, we are so excited to recognize our Friends members who help make these programs like this possible with their financial support. So thank you so much for having an impact on our children in your our neighborhood, and all of our neighborhoods. You're creating some lasting summer memories. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our Hennepin County Library Director, Scott Dimstra. So please join me in welcoming Scott back to Talk of the Stacks.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks to all of you for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with our library friends at Talk of the Stacks, and this is now it feels like I'm an old friend now, being here at the library for the last 7, 8, I've even lost count of the months that I've been here as well, too. But this is my first summer here, and summer is beautiful in the state of Minnesota. Summer is also beautiful within our libraries as well, too. When you look at the use of our libraries, we have 20,000 visits in our library spaces in the summer as well, too, each month. Each month, 20,000 visitors coming into our library spaces during the month. That's an amazing number. And it's through impactful programs. So Christy talked about summer learning and summer learning for students in our area. One of the stories I wanted to share with you tonight before we introduce tonight's author is an impactful program called Let's Read. Let's Read is a program that is funded with support from the Friends of the Hennepin County Library. It's a program that offers one-on-one tutoring for students K through 5 who are at least 6 months to 2.5 years behind reading level for their grade. Heavy, impactful program. We started it in January of this year, and just now we're starting to see some of the positive results of participants as well, too. I wanted to share with a story of one student who, through the program, reached an entire new grade level at his midpoint assessment. After receiving one-on-one attention and a couple of literacy skills he struggled to understand, it clicked and he started to see significant success. So one of the things that we did is we don't want to just share the numbers, share the impact. We also want to share the stories from the caregivers, from the volunteers, and most importantly from the students in the program as well, too. So from the caregivers, we heard Let's Read is his favorite subject in school. They started Let's Read uninterested in reading with no confidence. Now they want is all caps, to show off their reading and never miss a chance to read in front of people. It is a night and day difference. Next, from our tutors. A lot of kids are asking for other books outside of giveaways. Part of the program is we know it's important for students to have books at home, so we give away books as part of the program. And I think having this program in the library is so important. We're able to pick out books to check out after each session. It's just so good for them, and I'm so thankful to be part of it. Now, the part that when I saw this kind of mid-year assessment almost brought me close to tears is when we started to see the quotes of students who were participating in the program as well, too. The first one said, "This is a great day. I'm really, really happy I came." The next is, "I'm really proud of myself." And that's what we heard is the confidence that students were seeing after being part of the Let's Read program. One student, we had a survey for students that one of the questions was, "I feel supported at Let's Read." And they asked how many times they could actually circle that question because they agreed with it so much. One of the questions asked about the relationship with the volunteer and how supportive they were, and the student responded, "She believes in me and helps me every Saturday." This last one, the student said, "Can you please tell my mom how good I did?" That one gets me every time. I practiced for tonight just so I wouldn't tear up on stage saying it. It still almost got me. But you see, within those 20,000 visits, there's stories. There's impactful stories as well, too. And some of those stories could not be accomplished without the support of the Friends of the Hennepin County Library. So I'd like to take a moment to thank all of you for your support and to thank the Friends of the Hennepin County Library so that we can offer programs like the Let's Read program. And as a continuation of that mission of inspiring, facilitating, and celebrating lifelong learning, I see tonight's author event as a celebration of that lifelong learning, and I'd like to introduce tonight's special guest. Tracy Chevalier is the New York Times bestselling author of 11 novels, including Girl with a Pearl Earring, which has been translated into 45 languages and made into a play, an opera, and an Oscar-nominated film. Her latest work of historical fiction, The Glassmaker, is a rich, transporting story that follows a family of glassmakers from the height of the Renaissance era Italy to the present day. The Star Tribune recently hailed the book as a vivid history lesson about a fascinating place and industry, animated through the lives and emotions of its compelling characters. Please join me in welcoming the incredible Tracy Chevalier to Talk to the Stacks.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to be here. I'm always comfortable in libraries. They've been with me all my life, starting as a kid, so it's like coming home, so thank you. And thank you for coming out, because there are other things you could have been doing tonight, including, first of all, I was wandering around downtown and saw all these very flexible people, young women and men who, I was expecting them to do flips and things down the street, and you could be at that. And also you could be at watching a certain live event on television. So I feel a little honored that I have taken, presidents, forget about it. Me? Yeah, authors, that's where it's at. So thank you. What I'm going to do tonight is tell you a little bit about my new book, The Glassmaker, how I came up with the idea and what it's about, some of the trickinesses I had with it, and I'm going to read two scenes, one quite short, one a little bit longer, and then I'm very happy to take questions from the audience. So the most common question I get asked by readers, by journalists, by friends, by family is, where do you get your ideas? And it's an understandable question because I always wonder it of other writers. And I've noticed that when I get asked it enough times about a specific book, I end up kind of coming up with an origin story. And in most cases, it's a pinpointed moment when I suddenly think, I've got to write about that. So it could be lying in bed looking at a poster of a Vermeer painting on my wall and suddenly thinking, I wonder what the painter did to her to make her look like that, to give that expression. And then I thought, I've got to write about that. I went into a little dinosaur museum in southern England with my young son, we were looking around, and there was a display about a fossil hunter named Mary Anning from the area. 19th century, discovered some of the most important dinosaur fossils in England, and also was struck by lightning as a baby and survived. And I thought, I've got to write about that. What a great way to start a novel. And in fact, I definitely didn't go into that dinosaur museum looking for an idea. It just leapt out at me. I was walking a few years ago, walking around Winchester Cathedral, which is a city south of London, about an hour south. I live in London. And I was thinking, I want to write a cathedral novel. What am I going to write about? There's some interesting stories. Jane Austen's buried there. Various things happened in the cathedral. But my eyes lit on these cushions and kneelers in the choir stalls that had been embroidered by a group of women in the 1930s. And who would have ever guessed I would go, that? I'm going to write about that. I left the book, A Single Thread, came about in that way. So this time, there is a pinpoint moment, and you know, it kind of involves you. Yes, you the readers, believe it or not. Readers come up to me with suggestions all the time about what I should write about. Yeah, and they email me, they come up at events, and I'm very polite, I always am. I was brought up polite, so. But usually people are so enthusiastic about a particular subject that I end up saying, you know, you should write it, not me. And, but one time, a man came up to me after an event. It was in Milan, in Italy. It was for a reading of Remarkable Creatures, an event about it. And he said to me, I'm not going to do the Italian accent because I'm terrible at it. He said, I think you should write about Venetian glass beads because they were used in trade for centuries and they were mostly made by women, and you like to write about women. That man's name was Giorgio Teruzzi. And a great picture of him, terrible picture of me, but I said to him, thank you. And he said, here's some books, a couple of books I've written about them. I thought, okay. And I took them back, had a quick look at them, and then I put them on my bookshelf at home and pretty much forgot about them for years. But obviously I didn't. They stuck back here somewhere. You may know that I like to write about people making things, whether it's paintings, embroidering cushions and kneelers, making quilts for the last runaway. I'm interested in what our ancestors did. I'm trying to make connections between us and them. And so beads, it kind of makes sense that glass would be something I would get interested in. But what really brought it out, what really made me think, okay, this is what I'm going to write, is that at the same time I was starting to think about this, my husband said to me one day, do you think you could write a book set somewhere we actually want to go? I was a little offended because I have set 2 books in Ohio. I happen to love Ohio. And Winchester is, Winchester's the kind of city you visit once, and it's very nice, but you don't need to go again. But I went many times. He went once. So, and then I thought, beads, glass beads. So I said, how about here? How about Venice? And he said, yes, please. Let's do that. And so I was choosing slides for this talk, and I thought, I can't just show you one side of Venice because it's so beautiful. I have to show you some other scenes too. It is the most beautiful, magical, and unique city, and that's where I'd like to live, thank you. And so that's what I did. I set a book in Venice. So I do listen to you. And in fact, I'm going to harness that. Maybe there's something in all of this, readers suggesting things to me. What I've decided to do, I have a little notebook. It's got a detail from a Vermeer painting on it. and I'm going to put it out on the signing desk later. And if you have an idea, write it down, and write your name down too, so that I know who to thank in the acknowledgments if it ever comes about. So there are actually quite a few ideas in here already from I've been on a book tour, so there's some it makes interesting reading at night when I go back to the hotel and I get into bed and say, what did they say in Milwaukee? Oh, interesting. So it's a memory for me of you. So if you have anything, please put it in, and I promise that I will consider it. Now, the book The Glassmaker is about a glass family called the Rossos. And it is they are master glassmakers. And they live on an island off of Venice. Venice, this is a map from the 1500. And Murano is this little island there, just off of it. And the reason all the glassmakers were on the island and are still on the island is that in 1291, the government decided to move them there for two reasons. And it was two reasons of control. One is they wanted to control fires. So glassmaking, you use a lot of furnaces, and when they were in Venice, there were fires and they didn't want the whole city to burn down. So they thought, well, if we move it to this inconsequential island over there, a little one, at least it'll only burn down a little island rather than a big island. The other control they wanted to maintain was on the glassmakers themselves. So Murano glassmakers at that time and still now were the finest glassmakers in the world. Venice made a lot of money on those exports of glass to the rest of mainland Europe and elsewhere. And so the Doge said to the glassmakers, you have to stay on Murano. If you go to the mainland with your techniques and your secrets, we're going to come after you and we're going to kill you. And indeed, that threat kept those glassmakers on the island. I've been trying to find out whether anyone actually was killed, but I've not been able to find out. But obviously the threat was there and they were very worried about it. So they didn't move. So they remained on Murano. The Rossos from the 15th century onward, and it was a very male profession. It still is, actually. There are women glassmakers on Murano, but not that many. And I want to show you a couple of videos. I, of course, went to Murano many times, and I spent a lot of time in studios and workshops watching them make glass. And if you go to Murano as a tourist, you will see lots of demonstrations. And then they herd you into the showrooms and try to sell you stuff. And that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to try to see guys at work just doing their thing. So I'm going to show you the guys doing their thing. I was very lucky to meet the wife of the man sitting. His name is Davide Fun, and he's a glassmaker from many generations back on Murano. His wife, Amy, is American. We met each other and became great friends, and she's been there 20 years and could show me things. She could show me the secrets and introduce me to people. And I learned so much from her and from the people she introduced me to. And Davide let me watch him. And I wanted to show you this because there is something quite macho about it. And also the guys are, I describe it in the book as kind of like a dance that they do back and forth. And somebody said to me, glass making is really all about timing. So they're making a goblet, and it's absolutely crucial when this guy brings over a bit that it's the right temperature at the right time. And then the other guy comes. So it's this sort of dance they do around each other. This is just about 30 seconds long. Also, there's a bit of, you might be able to hear a bit of very trashy radio, which they listen to all the time, which is, here we go. that goblet in about 20 minutes, and then they made it all over again. And they made, I don't know, I think in the annealer, which is this thing that cools them down slowly, there were probably 24, 25 in there already. And they just, it was incredible to watch because I started to recognize the movements. Oh, this guy is now going to move. He's going to take that rod over here and do that, and then he's going to hand, the other guy's going to hand this. And they just did it over and over again, like almost like a minuet. You know, imagine a Jane Austen dance, but spread out over 20 minutes. It was really remarkable. And then this studio, again, they're all a bit older, but there are some young guys there. But this thing that he's making, first of all, I love the fact that there's this flame kind of just sitting there, burning down Murano. The bit of glass that he's working on there, somebody told me weighed 60 pounds. So it's very heavy, very strong. There. So that's what the men did. But as Giorgio Teruzzi told me, women did make some sort of glass. What they did was they made glass beads sitting at a kitchen table with a little lamp full of oil and a flame coming up, and they had bellows on the bottom. This is a better, so it was like that. They'd have a table like that in the kitchen. They would sit over it, work the bellows, and the air would wouldn't blow the flame out, but actually make it stronger and hotter. And I wanted to see one of these tables, and I found somebody finally who had one, Cesare Toffolo, and he found this table actually in France. And he worked the bellows for me. He didn't light it, but it was great to see it because I always like to see the things that that my characters are using, and also to do what they do. So women made lots and lots of beads. Now some of these beads were made in furnaces, but a lot of them were blown. Were not blown. Were made over this lamp at kitchen table, and they became very complex. And they started selling them all over the world. So you'd have these cards full of them, and people could order what they wanted from the cards. This is from the Museum of Glass on Murano, which is a really lovely place. So you can see these very complicated beads. They don't look like they're made of glass, but it's opaque glass. And people would order, you know, I'd like 20 of the 1224 and 20 of the 1227, so that's how they would do it. They'd have these glass cards. And I actually made some beads. I'm going to show you. So I have some beads here. I went to a bead maker on Murano twice, and also to a bead maker in London. And I'm going to put these on the table afterwards so that you can see them. And there's also some beads I've bought, so you can see what some of the old beads look like up close. But I always like to do what my characters do. It's so much easier to describe it if I've done it myself. And then I can pick up on things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So when one of the bead makers was trying to teach me, and I wasn't terribly good at it, I must say, but it was fun. When you heat the glass, you're working with this little iron rod, and you're trying to use this little paddle to, when you heat it, the glass gets so liquidy, it's really hard to handle. And she said, what you need to do is go home and get some runny honey and 2 chopsticks, and then put a ball of it on one chopstick and play with it back and forth, because that will teach you some dexterity. And I would never have guessed to do something like that. So of course I wrote it in the book, not with chopsticks, because it's not that country, but it's honey between sticks. And those sort of details are what make a book sing. It's what makes them authentic. It's what makes you believe me that I know what I'm talking about. So that's women making beads, but there was, and they were seen as inconsequential to men. They weren't threatened by them because they didn't cost very much. They weren't made but with a furnace or in a workshop. They were made at a kitchen table by and large. You know, it was like women were mainly looking after the household and the kids, But when they had a little time, they would do that. And so men didn't feel threatened by it. But there was one woman in the late 1400s named Maria Barovier, and she did work in glass. Sorry, there's some other beads. She made these, she invented this bead, which is called the Rosetta. Became very famous, became very popular all over the world, particularly in Africa. And it was so, and this was made in a furnace, not over a lamp, what they call lamp work. It was made in a furnace with different canes and molds, and then you had to bevel it to make it look like that. And she was so respected for this that she was given her own workshop, which was unheard of for a woman. And at first I thought maybe I should write this novel about her. And then I thought, no, I don't, as you may know if you've read my books, I often, only a couple times have I used a real person as a main character. Mainly real people come on and they have small but significant parts, but I really want to have a main character who I can play around with and have her do things and live at different times. And so I don't want to be limited by someone's biography. So I thought, okay, I'm going to have, my heroine is called Ursula Rosso. And when the book begins, it's 1486, and she's 9 years old. And then a few years later, there is a tragedy in her family. And they start having financial difficulties. And she has to figure out a way to help her family, if she can. And she goes to see Maria Barovier and says, what can I do? And Maria says, learn to make beads. My cousin will teach you. And so her cousin teaches her how to make beads. And Ursula, you have to practice a lot though. You know, wasn't it Malcolm Gladwell said you have to 10,000 hours worth of work to get any good at anything. So she hasn't put quite the 10,000 hours in for this scene I'm going to read. She's, I think, 17 at this point, and her mother has had a baby unexpectedly, and she's looking after her sister, also trying to make beads and do the housework. So she's out on Murano. I'm going to give you a little picture of it there. Murano is like Venice, but quieter, calmer, and the buildings aren't so high. So I highly recommend it. It's gorgeous. So she runs into Maria Barovier, and I've chosen this scene to read because in a way it summarizes what's going to happen in the rest of the book. One afternoon, Ursula was bringing Stella back from the wet nurse and took the long way around so that she could walk along Murano's Grand Canal. It was quiet compared to the Venetian Grand Canal she'd had a brief taste of, but there were a few palazzos to admire and wealthy Venetians holidaying in them to spy on. The baby was in a post-feed daze, and Ursula was in no hurry to get back to the stinking laundry and grubby house. She paused by the water, ever moving, glistening in the autumn sun, and took out a bead she'd made and now carried in her pocket. It was a translucent green, like the canal where you couldn't see the bottom. She held up the bead to compare its color to the water. Admiring your own work, are you, Ursula Rosso? Maria Barovier had come to stand beside her. Ursula dropped her hand, embarrassed. I haven't had a chance to make much. The beadmaker nodded at Stella, asleep on her sister's shoulder. Babies take up all your time, don't they? Show me. She held out her hand. Ursula reluctantly dropped the green bead into her palm and held her breath as the older woman inspected it. Not yet, she said, handing it back. The shape and color are good together, but the symmetry is not quite there. Hang on. Hang on. Not yet, she said, handing it back. The shape and color are good together, but the symmetry is not quite there. Ursula sighed. Glass is so hard to control. That's what I like about it. It's an unpredictable mistress. It has its own laws. You have to practice more before you show your beads to Signor Klingenberg. The merchant needs to have no reason to turn you down. There are no women in the glass business because our work must be perfect to be accepted by men. And with glass, there's no such thing as perfection. You are in the business, though. I'm an anomaly, the exception to the rule. I suspect it will take a very long time for women to be accepted into the glass world. Hundreds of years. She gazed at her protege. Are you sure you want to spend your whole life knocking on the door to the workshop? Maybe. Imagine yourself in the future then, trying to make a living, making beads for gentlemen, for countesses, and even for empresses. Imagine they reject you because of a whim, changing tastes, wars and plagues and poverty, things outside of your control. Can you imagine all that and still do lamp work? Ursula looked out across the shifting, glittering water, contemplating the shifting, glittering, unpredictable path ahead of her. Yes, she replied, I can. Because already she was as attached to her bead lamp as if it were a child. Maria nodded. Take this then, a gift to keep you going. She reached in her pocket, pulled out a bright new rosetta, and handed it to Ursula, then turned away without even a goodbye. Ursula studied the bead, beveled so its layers of red, white, and blue glass shone in a scalloped pattern, and smiled. Grazie, Signora Maria, she called after the bead maker. Maria Barovier waved a hand in the air without looking back. So there's something a bit peculiar about that setup, though. Maria Barovier says it's going to take hundreds of years for you to be accepted as a glassmaker. And indeed, it does take hundreds of years. And yet, at the end of the book, which ends in 2021, Ursula is only in her late 60s. She lives for 5 centuries. How does that happen? Well, I really wanted to write a book that covered 500 years of Venetian history because I wanted to understand better how the city went from being a wealthy center of trade in the Renaissance to the sort of tourist destination it's become now, where it used to have 160,000 residents and now it's under 50,000. And they don't have enough doctors and hardware stores and pharmacies to actually live there because almost all of the apartments are becoming Airbnb. So one thing, if you go to Venice, stay in a hotel because that helps the economy much more than an Airbnb does. So I wanted to cover 500 years of Venice, but I really hate it when I read a long book that covers a lot of time and I get to know characters and love them, and then they die and you have to care about their great-great-great-grandchildren. No, I didn't want Ursula to die. And I thought, okay, this is a little bit of a problem here. So one night I was lying in bed. I was actually in Venice doing research, and I had a eureka moment. I just thought, well, they don't die then, do they? And then I thought, well, what are you doing? And I thought to myself, the thing about Venice is that when you're there, it feels like a timeless place. It feels like time is moving at a different pace from other places. Because there are no cars, it feels very old-fashioned, very old, not old-fashioned, but old. And it's oriented around the water, and the buildings are old, and you just start to forget what's going on out in the real world. It's really wonderfully magical in that way. And I thought, well, if there's any place in the world that I could make time slow down compared to the rest of the world, it's Venice. So that's what I'm going to do. I think I might also have been affected a bit by the pandemic So I researched and wrote a lot of this book during the pandemic, and I don't know about you, but I felt like time was very elastic then. It seemed to go slowly and yet then suddenly fast, and I feel like there are a couple of years there that I just lost. They're gone. And so maybe that had an effect. But I had a little, so I wrote a draft, and then I edited it as best I could. What happens is I redraft until I can't fix it anymore, even if I know there's something wrong, I can't work out what it is. So then I send it to my editors. I have a US and a UK editor who work together. And normally, they read it and they write back to me and say, great, here's a few questions, you might want to tinker with this. So we have an editing revision, but it's usually always been pretty small, really, usually. And this time, I sent it to them, and my UK editor drew the short straw, and she rang me. And I was in a train station in England. It was very noisy. I was on my cell phone. I couldn't hear very well, but I could hear her saying, Tracy, what have you done? They should all be dead, shouldn't they? She said, I was reading it the whole time thinking, shouldn't they be dead? And I realized that I hadn't really explained it. I just did it. And I just somehow thought you were going to follow along. And so she said, I can see two paths for you. One is to revise this, to fix it. One is that you just limit yourself to 50 years of Venice history. And I thought, no. And then the other is that you go with the descendants and you follow them all the way through. And I was like, no. I said, look, I'll think about it. I'll try to figure out what to do. Hung up, got on the train, swore quite a lot, and bought myself a gin and tonic, which is, and sat there kind of muttering and thinking, ugh. And then I spent several months fixing it. And actually, I got unheard of. I got my husband to read it, which he normally reads only when it's done. I want him to, I care about him more than anybody else, so I want him to read it when it's as good as it can be. But this time I was really worried that it wasn't going to work. So I gave it to him, and I gave it to a friend who's a writer who also teaches writing. And I said, is this salvageable? And they both read it and they went, Tracy, this is great. You don't have anything to worry about. You just need to explain. Just give it a framework to explain to the reader what's going on, and then they'll be fine. They'll go along with it. It's great. And that's what happened. I spent quite a long time fiddling with a framework, just to explain what time alla veneziana is. Just the first page explains that. But the thing about it is, what I would say is it's not magical realism, because it's very much a book grounded in reality, the reality of making glass, of doing laundry, of looking after kids, of plagues and wars and poverty. It's there. It just happens to be like a stone skipping across the water. So a section ends, it touches down the 15th century and then touches down 100 years later. But they're more or less the same age, maybe aged a couple of years. The rest of the world has moved on, but so what? They don't really care. They kind of know what's going on. They know that if you go to terra firma, time's different there. So they're like, not going there. And that's how Venetians are anyway, most of the time. But the great thing was it allowed me to write about all kinds of things. So I wrote about the plague of 1575, which is a plague doctor who had come to the door and checked to see if you had it. And it was very odd because I was researching this particular section when the first lockdown had lifted. The British Library reopened, but you had to sit 2 meters apart and wear a mask, and so it's so strange reading about all the things the Venetians did, quarantining and lists of who you had been in contact with and all this. They did all of it, even long before we did. So that was very odd. But I also got to add Casanova in. So Casanova has a little part, a juicy little part, not for very long. And this is the 18th century when the carnival became a big thing again, and they used to go around in masks for like 6 months of the year. I wrote about Napoleon conquering Venice in 1797, and then sending his wife, Josephine, along to look at the city and report back to him. And you may notice that she's wearing a necklace. So there you go. Had to add that in. World War I, when there were battleships in the lagoon. The woman on the right is named Luisa Casati. She was a Bohemian woman who lived in a palazzo on the Grand Canal. I'm going to read a section about her, so I wanted to tell you a little about her. She was a little nuts, and she bought cheetahs, which she had in a gondola, and would go up and down the Grand Canal showing them off. She would wear a big fur coat and walk around St. Mark's Square in the moonlight and then drop the fur and not have anything on. The glassmakers knew her well because she used to have these elaborate parties, and she had, as a party favor once, for hundreds of guests, she had a Murano glassmaker make all these glass lanterns, hundreds of them. So they made a lot of money off of her. And they also used to, she didn't have any sense of money, and they used to charge her like 4 times what they would normally charge. And it was, I called it the Marchesa inflation. So I'm going to read about that in a second. But one last section that the book covers is COVID in 2020. And it was a shame because I had intended to go to Venice many times and actually stay there for a while and learn and do a language course and all that, and the pandemic put paid to that. So I didn't go quite as much as my husband would have liked, but we did go a bit. We did manage to go a bit after. But I don't want to end on that. Let's give you that while I read a much nicer thing to look at. While I read you a scene. So this is from 1915. Ursula's in her 50s. She's learned to make glass beads very well. She has a business. And, but she still doesn't have the respect of her brother, Marco, who's a maestro glassmaker. And in some ways, this book is about her trying to gain his respect. And is he ever going to respect her? She and a dressmaker have gone to the Marchesa Casati and offered to make a beaded dress. So Ursula's makes the beads for it. And she also offers the Marchesa to make a beautiful necklace for her. And the Marchesa says yes. So Ursula's at home making these beads for the dress and making the necklace. Marco sees this and says, who are you making this for? And she explains, and he's like, oh, the Marchesa, I know. I'm going to make her some goblets, and I'm going to put cheetahs around the bottom of them, and maybe she'll buy them from me. So he does this on spec. She hasn't ordered them. So he's finished that. They've got the dress ready, and they're going to go and see the Marchesa, and this is what happens. To get to Venice, they took a vaporetto, one of the new steam-driven water buses that were putting boatmen out of business and turning gondolas into purely tourist attractions rather than daily transportation. But Marco insisted that they arrive at the palazzo itself by gondola on the Grand Canal, even ordering the gondolier to don his old-fashioned red tunic and black and white hose, rather than his usual uniform of white shirt and black trousers. Marco himself wore a modern black suit and a fedora he had borrowed from a wealthier cousin. He had had his hair cut and hadn't shaved for a few days, so a shadowy beard sculpted his jaw. Ursula rarely thought of her brother as anything other than an irritation, but even she had to admit he looked handsome as he stood in the prow while she and the dressmaker sat. They arrived at the palazzo in mid-afternoon. The Marchesa Casati was standing at her window, looking out over the Grand Canal and drinking coffee as they pulled up. Marco removed his hat and bowed to her. This seemed to please the Marchesa, who blew him a kiss and waved them inside. Her servant led them straight up to his employer's salon. The Marchesa was wearing a dark green velvet robe and smoking a cigarillo in a long onyx holder. Today, her hair was auburn rather than orange. Her makeup was less extreme, no powder this time, and her lipstick had rubbed off on her coffee cup, but her kohl and mascara looked slept in. She squealed when the dressmaker held up the dress, weighted with its bead armor. "I'll try it on now," she cried, and stepped out of her robe to reveal her naked body. Before looking away, Ursula noted that her pubic hair was dyed the same auburn as her head. Marco was gripping the wooden box containing the goblets, his knuckles white against the mahogany. He couldn't take his eyes from the Marchesa. Hers was not the sort of beauty or behavior he'd be used to. Ursula was delighted to see her brother so out of his depth. It seemed the Marchesa had an eye for design. The dress looked stunning on her, making her into a vampiric Boudica. "Perfection," she breathed. "You have worked miracles." "Marchesa," Ursula bowed, then stepped forward, unfolding a swatch of ivory-colored velvet. "Your necklace." Perhaps she got the timing wrong, or the necklace did not go with the dress, not that that seemed to stop the Marchesa Casati from wearing what she liked. Perhaps she needed more time to admire herself in her beaded armor, or she was distracted by the man in the room. She picked up Ursula's necklace, stated, "Glorious," and handed it to her maid, who opened a cedar chest heaped with gold, silver, pearl, and myriad other colors of necklaces, dropped it in, and shut the lid. The black, red, and gold necklace was going to disappear without a trace among all the other necklaces, never worn, and the commissions Ursula had imagined from the Marchesa's friends would disappear with it. "At least I've been paid," she thought, "but no more fancy necklaces for rich people. I am done." Marco looked at his sister with something like pity. Then he turned to the Marchesa. "Perhaps you would like a drink to celebrate your new dress." An excellent proposal. The Marchesa seemed unsurprised that a strange man was in her room offering her a drink. "I have just the glasses for you. Allow me." Marco set the box on a table and indicated to the maid to move aside a jumble of clothes, cigarettes, vases of dried flowers, a plate of moldy oranges. When enough space had been cleared, he unfurled a piece of gold Indian silk and took his time smoothing it. Enchanted by his theatricality, the Marchesa moved closer. Marco pulled out the goblets from their nest of cotton and velvet, placed them on the silk, and stepped back. The Marchesa shrieked, making everyone jump. "Genius," she cried, snatching up one of the goblets. "Spectaculare," she proclaimed, as she turned the glass in her fingers, admiring the sinuous cheetah at the base, the string of baubles making up the stem, the rows of gold flowers painted around the rim of the glass. Magnifico. The Marchesa looked down on Marco, for she was a good deal taller than him, her liquid eyes shining. "You and I must drink to your skill." Her words made clear that Ursula and the dressmaker were not included in this celebration. Ursula looked at her brother. Would he be confident enough to make sure he was paid? "My brother's work is in high demand throughout Europe," she said, "but for you, he will charge the special price of 1,000 lira for the pair." Marco stared at her. They had not discussed price and the special Marchesa inflation. That Marchesa interrupted him with a laugh and a wave of her hand, at once agreeing with Ursula and dismissing her. "Sort that with my servant on your way out." Ursula raised her eyebrows at her brother. "In bocca al lupo," she mouthed as she left. "Good luck." Marco was gone for 3 days. His wife, Monica, seemed unbothered. "I don't want to know what he's up to," she said. "He'll come back." When he returned, minus his shirt and the fedora, his suit torn, circles under his eyes, and still a little drunk, Monica duly slapped him because it was expected of her, and he played the hangdog husband as expected of him. but they quickly went back to normal. Ursula found this hard to understand. If her husband were to go off with a louche marchesa who had a tendency to drop her clothes, she would be furious. Marco is Marco, Monica explained, and Venice is Venice. It's not Murano, grazie a Dio. I expect nothing of him when he's over there. Here, he behaves. Thank you. Now, I think it's time for some questions, if anyone has them. Rob is walking up and down with a microphone and is very happy to hand it to you if you have any questions. Yes, here.
My question is how you handled the Italian expressions and the
Yes.
with the glossary at the end of the book, rather than maybe footnotes or asterisks or whatever.
Oh, did you only find the glossary at the end? Oh, sorry. I don't want to ever footnote because it's too much like nonfiction, academic. And I guess so there are some Italian phrases and Venetian phrases too, because there's a whole dialect that's Venetian. And there's quite a lot of swearing in Venetian. So there's some very spicy swears that are translated at the back of the book. And I'm sorry that I don't know quite how to do that. Yeah. Yes, I don't speak much Italian. I had intended to learn it, and it just didn't happen. But I got various Italians to read it, and also a Venetian historian. And I had learned a couple of Venetian swears from just being there, and I had it in the book. And when the Venetian historian read it, there was one particular swear which I don't dare to translate because it's so rude. And he just said, "Oh, Tracy, no woman would ever say that, or man." He said, "I won't let you. Here, use this one instead." So, this is the thing about swearing in another language. You don't really know how strong it is. Yeah. And so I got a lot of help with that. But yes, there is a glossary at the back in case you're curious. Yeah. Any other questions?
Our next question is in the back of the
Okay.
auditorium.
Hi, thank you for being here, Tracy.
Pleasure.
I apologize, I don't know much about you. I've read some of your books, love them, but I'm curious to know where you were born, where you studied. Have you always known you wanted to be a novelist?
That's why I write historical fiction, because it's not about me. I don't want to write about myself, so that's why I hide in plain sight, because everybody just pays attention to the book and not to me. But I will answer those questions, I promise you. I was born in Washington, D.C., and grew up there. I was a very bookish child. The big person in my life was the children's librarian at our local public library, Mrs. Carney. And every week I'd go in to get a stack of books, and she would always set something aside for me and say, "I think you're ready for this." And then she'd remember what it was she'd given me, and I'd come in the next week and she'd ask me about it, and we'd talk about it, and she was wonderful. I talked about writing a lot. I only did a little bit of it. I think a lot of people are like that. They talk about writing but don't get to it. And then I majored in English at Oberlin College, and my third year there, my junior year, I went on a semester to London, and I fell in love with the city. So after I graduated, I went back just expecting to stay for 6 months, and I ended up staying forever, because I met an Englishman there. And in fact, somebody who is, Anne is here tonight, who was on the London semester with me. And we're gonna have dinner afterwards and reminisce about it all. So yes, those old college ties are very strong. They last a lifetime. Anyway, I ended up in England, living in London, and I got a job in publishing, which is what a lot of writers do. But I wrote short stories on the side. And eventually I decided I wanted to focus on my own words rather than other people's. So I did an MA in creative writing there, and gave me a year to sort of take myself seriously, take the writing seriously, write a lot, start a novel. So it just developed from there. And eventually, I juggled writing and freelance editing until Girl with a Pearl Earring was published, and then suddenly it kind of took off, and I could work as a writer full-time. So I've done that ever since. Yeah. I think there's someone here. Amanda, yes.
I have two questions, greedily. One is if anybody's ever covered a topic that you really wanted, and that in hindsight, you would be like, oh, I wish I did that.
Oh, that's a great question. Huh. Gosh, I can't think of anything offhand, but I've definitely read books where I think, I wish I had written that.
Yeah.
I wish I could write that beautifully. And also, I admire writers who manage to have a twist in the books. I mean, I don't read a lot of crime fiction, but I'm always, twists are, I just thought every twist has been used. And, but somehow they manage to think them up. And also just the beauty of writing, when a writer writes a beautiful phrase, I just think, oh, I wish I could do that. I tend to be plainer in my writing, and so it's more general, it's a general answer to your question, but I definitely have a lot of envy.
And my other question is, the Girl with the Pearl Earring movie, it's so elaborate in the details that they get into and the scenery, you can see up close just every kind of detail that you get into in the book. And so I'm wondering if you consulted on it and if you were happy with how it kind of turned out as compared to how you described things.
I was not well, out of courtesy, they showed me a draft of the screenplay, but it was very much clear to me that they didn't really want me to work on it. And I thought, you have to choose your battles. So I think I chose 3 things to remark on. And the screenwriter was great, and she sort of justified them, but she listened to me too, and then that was it. But I visited the set a couple of times just for fun. I didn't have anything to do with how they put it together. So all that stuff you see on the screen that's really accurate and beautiful and very carefully created was all the production designer did amazing things. And I did like the result. I know there are a lot of writers who are disappointed with when their books are made into films or television, but I felt like it was not the book, because it can't be, but it was like the sister of the book or the cousin of the book. It was very recognizable. You could see the family resemblance, and that was enough. And even, they had to slightly change the ending. There were things they did that I asked why. So the end, in the book, it jumps 10 years when Vermeer dies. Sorry, spoiler alert, but, and in the book in the film they didn't do that. And I said, why? And the director said, because when you go to the movies and you're sitting there, you don't want to leap forward 10 years. You want it to be all enclosed within a comfortable, a space of time that you can understand. And I thought, yeah, it made sense. So, but I felt like it had the tone of the film, of the book, and it was beautiful to look at. The music was great. I know the director loved Dutch painting, so he referenced a lot of different paintings, not just Vermeer, but other Dutch painters. So I suppose the word is I was relieved with the result. I think I was a little worried that people would just replace Greet, the main character, in their heads with Scarlett Johansson. And even I did that just when I first saw it. But then after a while, it was like that sort of faded away, and my Greet came back into my head. And I'm hoping that's case, I think it's always better to read the book first and see the film, because then you've got your own film in your head, and that's really important, because that's what reading is all about. Whereas if you see the film first, it's hard to get that film out of your head when you read the book. Yes, sir.
I'm curious about how much time it takes you to research all of the different historical eras that you cover and the work that people do. I'm thinking of Remarkable Creatures and all of the information about Mary Anning and what she did. You must put in an awful lot of time in advance.
Yes.
And so even though you majored in English, you must have a deep interest in research and details in order to take those and then bring them to life. So
I do. I wasn't that interested in history in college, but I think history is something that you develop an interest a little bit later. So I was 30 when I started, and it started out with researching family history, which is often what happens. It gets you into the past. The research process is crucial to me. I love it. I actually love it more than the writing, and I do a good 6 months to a year before I start writing the story, depending upon what it is. For the glassmaker, it was daunting because it was 500 years. But I find when I go through that process, when I'm reading and I'm talking to people and going places, it gives me ideas for the story. And as I'm doing the research, I'm slowly developing the main character in my head, even without writing them down. And I try to come up with a name for them, and then things start to appear in the research that I think that's part of the story here. That's what I'm going to focus on. So I actually use it as a prompt, as a creative prompt, as much as anything else. But research is crucial because I need to convince you that I know what I'm talking about and I know the period. And I have to create a whole world for you. And in order to do that, I have to learn about everything. And I don't always show it all. I don't want to show it off or show it all, but I need you to know that I know it so that you can trust what I do show you.
We have time for one final question, but just a reminder, the evening doesn't end here. Tracy will be signing books after the program. The book signing will be taking place at the end of the bridge outside of the auditorium, and our wonderful local bookseller, Majors and Quinn, is outside with both copies of The Glassmaker and Tracy's earlier titles. So please make sure you stop by, grab a book, and get it signed after the talk. And with that, it is time for the final question.
And don't forget, if you have ideas. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can share with us what you're reading now, or what you have just read, or what you're hoping to read, and what you gravitate towards when you want to cuddle up in bed and read your book. And
I just finished James by Percival Everett, which is a retelling of the Huck Finn story from Jim the slave's point of view. And I also, before that, I read Long Island by Colm Toibin, which is the sequel to Brooklyn. Yeah, both, oof. And I think the books that I've liked the most in the past year are both pretty unusual. One is called The Safe Keep by, she's got a big long name, Yael van der Wooden. She's Dutch-American, and The Safe Keep is set in 1961, and it's about a house, a woman living in a house in the Netherlands that she moved to as a girl during the war. And her brother and his girlfriend the girlfriend comes to live there for the summer. And it's about their relationship and the history of the house, which starts to get uncovered. And of course, the war comes into it. And it's really unusual and takes surprising twists that I was totally not expecting. So it was great. And the other one, I can't remember the author's name. And I always complain when people say they can only remember my title of my book, but not me. It's all about me. But I'm just doing it now. This one is called The End of Drum Time. And it was a National Book Award finalist last year, and it's by a Finnish-American woman, and it's set in the Arctic Circle, and it's about reindeer hunting, and set in 1851. And it's sort of a Romeo and Juliet story, and she did incredible research. You feel like you're in that tent and you're looking after those reindeer. It's really, really impressive. And I like reading all stuff. I tend to read a lot of historical fiction, but it's sort of accidental. I don't deliberately do it. But it's sort of, I guess it's what unconsciously appeals to me. I find contemporary life is so, I get so much of it from the news that I almost don't want to have to read about it too. I'd rather read about other things. So that's me. On that note, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.